Before the bullets ever flew over the ridges of the Little Bighorn, there was an ugly scene in a guardhouse. Huston said he saw Tom Custer, George Custer's brother, kick and slap a Sioux prisoner named Rain in the face. Soldiers held Rain in place while Tom worked him over, until Huston slipped out before things got worse. Huston was part of the small group that later helped Rain escape. He didn't brag about it, but he didn't deny it either. And though he wasn't there on the battlefield itself, he knew there were white men who were, with other native nations, not alongside the Sioux. As Huston asked, would any of them, then or now, openly admit it? For Huston, who spent 15 years living mostly in teepees, there was one striking fact: in all those years, he never saw or heard of an adult white male kept alive as a prisoner among the Plains tribes. Could there have been exceptions? Possibly. But he insisted he was sharing what he personally witnessed, nothing more. Huston defended Major Reno against charges of cowardice. From what Huston heard, Reno lost his nerve briefly but didn't entirely collapse. Instead, Reno pulled his men back up the bluffs to save what he could. The panic in the battalion below? Huston accepted that happened. But as he put it, our people, meaning the native warriors, had put real terror into those soldiers. Reno, after all, had fought bravely in the Civil War. But Huston believed Reno lacked any real grasp of Indian warfare, and that ignorance made him the perfect scapegoat later. Most newspaper writers, Huston argued, had no idea how Plains tribes organized leadership. Crazy Horse wasn't just some charismatic war leader. Among the Sioux, he was the highest-ranking of 4 principal chiefs, something akin to a major general. His white stole, worn draped over his shoulders, wasn't for decoration. It marked a man willing to tie himself to a lance stuck in the ground, fighting to the death rather than retreat. Sitting Bull, by contrast, held a religious office rarely understood by outsiders, a water pourer. Only 7 men across the entire Lakota nation could claim that title at any time. In European terms, Huston suggested, it made him as weighty as a cardinal in the Catholic Church. Red Cloud had earned that same degree, becoming something like a political power broker in the eyes of his people. To Huston, Sitting Bull's true stance was simple, even gentle by the standards of his day: leave us alone. Black Kettle had said the same. They weren't seeking conquest or revenge, they wanted the whites to stay out of land the Great Spirit had given them. They knew there'd be bloodshed if that didn't happen, but it wasn't what they were after. Huston firmly believed there were white men fighting alongside native forces at Little Bighorn, but not in Sitting Bull's ranks. Bull wouldn't even tolerate half-breeds among the Sioux during open conflict. Of all the white men who ever tried to understand the native point of view, Huston only truly respected Philo Clark of the 2nd Cavalry. Crook came close, but Huston thought Crook might have had a drop of native blood himself. Frank North could manage them tactically but still couldn't quite step outside a white man's mindset. Gruard, part French-Canadian and part Pacific Islander, lived so deep inside native culture that Bull himself married him into the family, until war forced Gruard out. Huston had heard of Bridger and Beckworth, too, but never met them in person. Huston had no patience for pretense, and in George Custer, he saw plenty of it. To him, the massacre of Black Kettle's band at the Washita River was an unforgivable crime, echoing the earlier horror at Sand Creek. That wasn't gallantry, it was butchery. Huston reminded anyone listening that the memory of the Minnesota Uprising still burned hot in American minds in the 1870s. Nobody truly expected mercy for the Sioux after Little Bighorn. That expectation colored everything. Witnesses shaded or denied details, wanting to avoid punishment or to please those in power. Over time, the survivors grew weary of endless questions and said whatever got the questioners to leave them alone. To the white press, any band leader became a chief, whether or not they held real authority. Rain in the Face, for instance, had the influence of a chief without the title or power. Huston explained that many native leaders were actually officers of military societies within their nations, positions with structure and rules that whites rarely grasped. Friendship, too, mattered more than blood. It was natural to praise a friend, hide their faults, and talk down an enemy. That human tendency shaped the stories outsiders gathered. Some accused Sitting Bull of cowardice for not personally charging into the fray. Huston saw it differently. Once Bull became a medicine man, his job shifted to making the hearts of his people strong, not swinging a club himself, just as General Pershing wouldn't lead a trench raid personally. Before that, Bull had fought bravely and taken scalps. His new role was spiritual, not tactical. The Cheyenne war cry, "Hi-ee-ee," Huston recalled, sounded high-pitched and almost panicked, yet it could send a chill down a man's spine. Some native accounts, like Crow King's, were mentally edited, Huston thought, to suit white ears. Crow King claimed the Sioux knew Custer's force had split. Huston doubted that, saying Custer's attack caught them by surprise. And when Crow King suggested that Custer might have turned the tide if he'd joined Reno, Huston dismissed it as polite fiction. The Sioux believed fiercely in Sitting Bull's prophecy that they could whip all the soldiers sent against them. Hump's story rang truer to Huston. In the chaos of close combat, nobody had time to watch the bigger picture. It was a swirl of men and horses, a blind, furious finish. Huston told how he once heard Custer declare that no enlisted man should ever be commissioned as an officer, claiming they'd carry the Barak room air into polite company. Huston would have accepted some enlisted men, but not the sweeping judgment. In contrast, Huston respected men like Mike Sheridan and Major O'Hara, who'd earned their place. To Huston, Gall had the steadiness of a Stonewall Jackson or a U.S. Grant, but with streaks of jealousy toward Sitting Bull. Crazy Horse, he thought, was a bold cavalry-style commander, like Hancock, though maybe not quite as flamboyant as J.E.B. Stuart. He also pointed out errors in the record. The Cheyenne weren't a Sioux tribe, as newspapers often wrote, but a separate nation. After the fight, some chiefs wanted to hold ground against General Terry's column. But Huston heard that Sitting Bull saw bad omens and ordered withdrawal. Scouts rushed in, warning of large forces approaching with artillery, bang guns, they called them. Huston noted how easily outsiders confused bands. Blackfeet Sioux weren't the same as the powerful Blackfoot Nation, and two groups called Gros Ventres had entirely different origins, one Arapaho-related, the other closer to the Crows. Huston floated ideas that would raise eyebrows today, that the Arapaho might trace back to Phoenician traders, that Cheyenne could have Norse roots, or that the Mandan were descended from Welsh sailors. These theories were personal speculations, grounded in odd linguistic hints and physical traits he'd noticed, but they reveal a mind always searching for deeper connections. Huston's perspective didn't come from books alone. Born in Richmond, Virginia, he was still a youth when he fought in Lee's army during the Civil War. When Union troops took Richmond, drunken soldiers battered his mother so badly she later died, and Huston never even found her grave. That bitterness burned into him. After the war, refusing to swear loyalty to the Union, he went west and lived among the Sioux, partly, he admitted, to even the score against the blue-coated soldiers. W.A. Graham, who gathered Huston's letters decades later, thought Huston knew as much about the Sioux, and the real story of Little Bighorn, as anyone could without being there himself. Editors suspected Huston had been in the hostile camp during the battle, though he always denied it. Yet what stands out isn't what Huston admitted or denied. It's the way he spoke, blunt, unsparing, human. He rejected hero worship, called out brutality when he saw it, and refused to dress history in polite fiction. In the end, Frank Huston's words pull us closer not just to what happened, but to the flawed, flesh and blood men who lived it.